Hello and welcome to the very first episode of House of Laporte podcast. What a wild ride to be here, to land here, and to be in this beautiful location recording this. I'm looking out at the lake, Lake Huron, and it is very windy. I hope it's not affecting the audio too much. Um, But what I'm promising you with this podcast is that I'm going to show up, lean back in my chair, having a conversation with you, unedited, unfiltered. I'll probably pause and stumble and maybe need a drink of water, but I want to not only allow myself to show up just like in this way, but maybe permission you as well to show up in a way that feels authentic, feels just like you're speaking to one of your best friends or, you know, rocking it out loud to yourself like many of us do, talking to ourselves. So I was tapping into how this first episode would go, and I wanted it to be a foundational introduction, basically, for those of you that may not know me, may not have heard my story and my experience, and really like how I've landed in this seat looking out at the lake in this moment. And over the years, I've been on podcasts, I've been on stages, I've created amazing retreats and served a lot of women through my story. I mean, I think that's the one of the most beautiful things that we have as humans to really offer each other wisdom and experience. Like we learn through stories really well. That's just how linguistically, our nervous system, all of it, that's how it works. So where I've shifted in the last few years, 5 years, really is into a new orientation. And you'll hear me say this word a lot. It's a metaphysically correct term to help you reconnect to how you create your reality. I've shifted into a new orientation around how I share my story, and I'm not going to leave out the parts that I think are super impactful, and I will speak to them from a place that could feel maybe triggering. It could feel um it could feel all sorts of ways, and I'm prepared to just show up and speak about it in the way that I'm positioned currently. And just so you know, I'm going to share a little bit about sexual trauma that I have experienced in this lifetime because that is a big part of my story. So if that does feel a little tender or not, where you're at right now, just take note, and um, maybe this would be an episode for you to come back to because it's not something that I'm going to weave through many of my conversations at all moving forward. But I do believe that it's an important part to highlight as I'm creating this introduction. And for those of you that, are new here, you can find similarities and feel um, all that I've traversed within myself to get to where I am. Okay. So, my very first memory of Earth life is actually being molested by an older boy neighbor who I considered my friend at that time. We lived like on a cul-de-sac, and it was the only friends that I knew. And I think that this really skewed how I understood friendship, obviously, from a very young age. And that embedded into my system a way of relating that wasn't necessarily normal or healthy or, just the average way that a young girl is taught to relate with friends. And so there was certain patterns in my life and how I maybe understood how to receive friendship, experience friendship. There was a skewed vision of how relationships were created from a very young age. And then shortly after those experiences, my parents divorced at a young age. I was probably, I think, 5. And going their separate ways, my dad moved to a few hours away. So, you know, the first 5 years of my life on earth were, I don't, there's also a part that's so important to mention, which I think a lot of us who have been through sexual trauma also, and like really intense starts to our earth life, we don't remember a lot. So let's also put in there, I don't remember a lot of my childhood. Like a very good chunk of my childhood, my body and brain has not allowed me to recall. And where I sit now, that is perfectly fine and beautiful. And I love my body. I love my brain. I love how all of that is always pointing to the fact that we are always supported for wherever we're at. And for me personally, trying to like rehash those memories or bring any of that up is not something that I'm interested in for many reasons. So, parents divorced early. My dad moved away to work, and I saw him irregularly for a long time growing up. And I know that he was doing his absolute best with who he was and continues to be. And this is the grace that comes with the work you do internally, especially around your parents, where, you move through phases of all sorts of emotions and implanted beliefs and programs and physiology that you run through your system that can create a really big gap in relating and more of a victim mentality. And I've definitely ran that programming, and I'll get more to that. And then my parents were separated, and then my mom and I moved into a trailer in town, because we were living actually closer to where I am now outside of town. And within a short time, my mom had met someone else who had 2 daughters. And then so all of a sudden I was moving into with this man that I didn't know, and he was cold and he had 2 daughters. So I had sisters all of a sudden, and I was still like working through what had already happened within the first like 7 years of my life. And then that relationship, he was a cold man. He was a man that probably had been through a lot in his life, not dealt with anything. Um, you know, his story affected my story and my way of relating to the masculine and men and being accepted and being loved by a masculine. And that really shaped a lot of anger that then grew through me as I started to get older. Um, in and that relationship was about 10 years, and the beauty that came out of that for me was my little brother. He was born when I was 12, and there was just this beautiful connection between myself and him. It felt like there was this incredible love that I had not experienced. And yeah, there's a special relationship there for us, especially in the beginning. And then there was a shift in their marriage, divorce, and we moved back into town and got our own place. And what continued to ensue was my mother looking for love the best way that she knew how. And, given the relationship she had with her dad, there was a similar patterning repeating in her deeply desiring to feel loved by a man or her dad. And, when we don't have the tools to recognize that, I think that's an important landmark as well within our generation now. Like, we have access to so much that they didn't have access to. And so a lot of them, like a lot of women and people were in survival mode and just literally surviving. And it took me a long time to get to that point, to that orientation within myself, to see the truth of the patterns my mom was repeating, the patterns my dad was repeating, etc. Like, the more you allow yourself to love yourself, heal, grow, love others, forgive others, like, it all does come down back down to love and gratitude and just doing that inner work to really be able to see people who they actually are in your life as your teachers. um, there's a lot more neutrality that begins to come through your system, which has been the gift of this journey for me as well. So through that experience, my mom was looking for men to fill what she needed, and I was a young teenager that was angry, and I had a lot of anger within myself. I had a young baby brother, and what often happened was I would be in charge of babysitting him when I was like 13, 14, 15, 16, etc., where I was angry, wanting to express um, myself, but I was also and needing to babysit. And my mom was having her experience, and I was put into a parental role very early, but also, drinking and doing drugs. And um, what I believe really saved me during this part of my life was sports. I put myself in all of the sports that I could so that I would have somewhere else to go. There was a lot of times that my mom's house felt unsafe for me in a lot of ways. And her and I have had many, many conversations about this and have been healing this between us for years. So I know, Mom, if you're listening, you know how much I love you. And this is just part of our story. And it's beautiful because look at where we are now. Okay, love you. And so the sports really saved me. I had coaches that were amazing. I was a very fast runner. I was an intense rugby player, soccer player. Like, I still to this day, and now I know how to run this intense energy that I have through me, and I'll talk more about the evolution of that. But when I was younger, and this is such an important part of the work that I'm always going to invite us to, like, I had the identity and I was running my energy, my intense, what I know now as creative energy, through this filtration system that was angry, hurt, had no way of coping, had no tools, I was an awful student in the school system, all of it, and having a unsafe home environment for me emotionally, felt like physically, with the men that were there. All of this was a perfect storm for me to then become the bully. So it's interesting, like we hear a lot about being bullied, and I like that matters. That is such an important thing to continue to put out into the narrative and to heal and grow from. And there's not a lot of talk or compassion for the bully. And that was me. That is an identity, a, a way of expressing my energy through what I knew that I have lived. And there's not a lot of women that I have come into contact with that are either willing to admit that. I was more of a bully with my fists. I think there can be a lot of women or girls, well, not I think, I know that a lot of girls can bully in really mean emotional ways. That wasn't me. I was am a very physical person, and I would say I'm still a tomboy. I was definitely a tomboy then, rolled with the boys a lot easier. There was, the similarities in how I showed up because I was protecting myself. All of that it was easier to hang out with boys, but I also had a lot of great girlfriends. And I was the bully. So that experience of my teenage years and, you know, hitting women, girls with my fists and just being an intense human being, as I was beginning to like heal and really reconcile with a lot of these identities, I realized that so much compassion and forgiveness was needed for myself. And if anyone that I have ever hurt, in fact, there have been women that I've had conversations with in my older years where I'm like, I am so sorry. I've had heartfelt conversations with women that I believe have forgiven me because I have done so much work to forgive myself and that younger version of myself that moved through life in that way. Luckily, I did have sports so that I could move a lot of this intense energy out on the field. I think that's why I loved and excelled at rugby because there was a physicality and a roughness and just an ability for me to kind of hurt people legally or it was accepted that I could enact this sort of violence or this frustration or just, like this grit, this anger, this rage that I needed to get out of my system. So I'm so grateful for that intuitive version of myself that signed up for cross country skiing and found a way to get myself there and hockey. And like, I just tried everything. I decided I'm going to do this sport, this sport, this sport, this sport. Like, I ran track. Yeah, that part of my deciding in that time and that identity that I held as an athlete was very healthy for me to move through that portion of my life. Um, After I got done high school, so through that, a lot of drinking really started as well. Um, and pot. I didn't do any hard drugs till later, but a lot of substances to numb, and I would get really, really blackout drunk. Um, I remember my 19th birthday there was a lot of violence just like outside of me. I didn't hurt anyone, just myself. And that pattern continued for almost another decade. And it wasn't I grew out of actually, having physical fistfights with people, and I grew into being a bouncer at bars. So again, I would position myself in these places of sort of the availability to inflict some sort of pain or, allow myself to take out frustration and rage and all of that and anger. Um, I don't think I actually ever had like I had to hold women down and, move them out of the bar, but I also really enjoyed when guys would get in fights and I could just like run in there and like I was very naturally strong. Okay. So, um then later in my journey, like early 20s, was really when things started to get a lot more intense with the drugs and alcohol, and promiscuity was a part of the programming that I was playing out as well. Um, for obvious reason, there was a model there where searching outside of you for what you needed was shown to me through my upbringing, and I did that with intensity. And, I know that people can look back on their early 20s and I had a lot of fun. Like, I had a lot of fun. I was definitely a wild child. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll is basically like how I describe that part of my life. Um, and within that, there was a sexual assault that led me to becoming pregnant. And I don't think I've ever shared it in this way, but this is what I'm here to do. The night that that happened, it was almost as if the culmination of everyone that I had hit with my hands and the way I showed up as the bully was brought back to me because that night I got in a fight because I was kissing a girl out in the parking lot at the bar that I worked at, and then I got beat up by a bunch of women, young women. I probably invoked it. I can't remember. And then a friend or an acquaintance said, "I'll take you home." And then he raped me. And then I fell pregnant. And I knew that I was nowhere near ready to bring a loving baby into this world. So I had an abortion. And so within that, just that story, I have lived these archetypes, right? Like these intense archetypes. I am considered a murderer in some people's eyes. I've had conversations with people who deeply, deeply, deeply disagree with abortion, even in the scenario that I was in. So when I'm telling you I've lived these intense identities that come with and archetypes that come with, they can come with a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. So after that experience, I moved to Vancouver. I was like, okay, life. I moved to Vancouver and lived with my cousin Danielle. And I was like, okay, I'm going to start fresh. Like many of us, we use geography to basically think that that's going to solve our problems. And we know that that doesn't work. Um, but I was invited into a beautiful, loving space and home and began a healing journey, so to speak, but I was still living out these patterns. Very soon after I moved, I got another bartending. So I was bartending. This is important to say. I was living within the bartending industry, um, very, enmeshed in all that that involves. And when I got a bartending job in Vancouver, I quickly met another left-handed Scorpio, and it was intense right away connection. And we moved in together really soon, and we lived together for 2 years. And he was going to school to be a naturopathic doctor, and it was fun but also toxic. We came from very similar homes, so there was, and no internal work was being done. So it was explosive and toxic and all of that. And that ended. And then I moved to Whistler and I deepened into the patterns there. I say Whistler like chewed me up and spit me out in 6 months. I knew that that was not, I went deeper into the patterns, then I was like, whoa. And then I came home and to Kincardine and lived with my mom again and worked my ass off because I got invited to go live in Australia and open a bar with some of the cool people that I met in Vancouver. So that summer I was on a goal and I did everything I could to save up the money to go. And then I moved out to Australia. So again, like moving, not healing anything, moving to another cool place like way across the world to um continue the pattern. Although it wasn't as intense there, it gradually got intense after that um sexual assault experience, but still nonetheless, I wasn't doing any healing work until so we opened the bar, it was great. Here's another part that was so impactful. During that the early part of my 20s, I wasn't doing any sports. I bought myself a BMX bike and I biked around a lot, but I wasn't doing the sports. The relief, like that energy that I was running through my system was being filtered through living in the bar industry, all of that, and those habits and patterns, etc., and searching for love outside of myself. And so I moved to Australia, we opened the bar, and I lived a short walk from the ocean. And it was so beautiful because I got to surf every day. So I was back in this way that I could express my energy. Hold on, I'm just going to take a drink. So I could express this energy. I tired myself out and then I worked long hours and it was amazing. And I was continuing the patterns, but not as much. And then one day, life um, literally broke my knee. Um, I was, my boss was Canadian as well. And he was like, go show the Canadian boys around Bondi. And I was like, sure, of course, I'll do that. And we got drunk, we were having fun, and then I jumped off like a knee wall, so like a 5-foot wall over by on Bondi Beach and blacked out, my knee shattered. I had heard it previously in Vancouver and didn't really rehab it, but my body is amazing. Our bodies are amazing. It rehabbed enough so that I could work in the bar industry without pain. I was surfing all of that. So that was the moment, and this is also around Saturn return, so I was late 27. I was, yeah, 27, and, um, yeah, that ended I was there for 8 months, and that ended my time in Australia, and I heard on the way home my internal voice say, "It's time to go home and heal." And so I came back to Kincardine. My mom was still with this boyfriend that was in my life for a very long time that I felt really unsafe around. And I said, like, he's got to go. She knew he had to go. And I just was like, I'm home. He's got to go, etc. So he left. And then I was slowly kind of continuing the patterns, but it was way, 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 way slowed down because I knew intuitively, like something big was shifting. And within a few months of being home, I actually saw a post last year where I think I came home on the summer solstice. Okay. So I came home and then I met Alec, my husband of 19 years. Um, in November. after coming home in June, after writing in my journal, I'm ready to meet my husband. 3 weeks later, I met Alec, and we were fast and furious getting together. There was a lot of traumas that happened in a short span of our time meeting each other, like big traumas in my family and his family, like family members, one dying, one almost dying, Alec and I finding his brother on the road. Like there was just a lot of stuff in a very short time that happened. So how we got together was very, very different than you'd say like a normal, typical dating relationship. And then we were pregnant. And when I became pregnant, I knew with even more certainty. There was never 1 second of doubt or anything. It was like the most certain thing that this was the next most beautiful chapter of my life, and that my firstborn came to me when he came to me, came to us so that I could heal. And within a short time of him being born, oh, I also had knee surgery during that time, that November, December, January period of time when we met and got together and all of that stuff happened. I had knee surgery. Then I felt pregnant. Then I discovered I was pregnant. When Ethan arrived within my body, I knew it was time to heal. And not long after that, I made a promise to myself and to him and to, you know, who I was becoming was the most important thing, that I was never going to live that life ever again. Like that was a clear cut of completion, that I was not going to repeat the patterns that I had grown up with, and that I was never going to stop learning. That's how the message came through to me, was like, I'm never going to stop learning. So up until that time, I forgot even to tell you that like I was enrolled in Fanshawe College in school and I barely went. And that's how much I didn't really put anything into school, because my perception of myself at that time was like I'm a horrible student and I was just so deep in the patterns. Um, so with that came healing, came what I know to be true is I'm healing. And the first sexual assault therapist that I had was a beautiful Indigenous woman who invited me to paint my feelings. And that was the invitation from life through her to open the doorway of creativity for me. And that also was so that gave me not only this new vehicle for expression and to see my feelings, to really work with that, it was also this vehicle of healing and how to move, like I'd mentioned a couple times already, like this intense energy that I hold, and to help me just like have something to do with my hands. And what I've known, I've been doing that for 17 years now. And that practice of deciding who I was going to be and taking action and continuously showing up, like the amount of different things that I've made over the years, self-taught, has been incredible, because I just decide, okay, I'm gonna make this. Like when I started taking photos, Alec got me a camera, and it was so beautiful. Like he completely supported and still supports my creative outlets. He came from a family of his mom's a family of 5 sisters, and 6. They are all super creative. So it was, of course, I landed in a family and with a husband that knew that this expression for women, whether he was conscious of or not, was an important thing. So I got a camera at first, and once I started taking pictures and developing pictures, I learned to frame them. And then shortly after they were up in a cafe for sale, like I just decided over and over and over again that what I made was important and beautiful and valuable, and people liked it. And that's exactly what happened over and over and over again. Like I would learn, I would interact with this creative essence. I would interact with life and listen to the idea and continue to just show up and create over and over and over again. And that took many different forms. And I was able to create something really beautiful in a short amount of skill learning time. And then, dress brides with their adornments and jewelry and hair clips and like just all of these beautiful accessories shortly after I learned it, because I was like, this is what I do now. This is what I do. And it was so well received. And like, that's been the creative journey, is because I decide this is what I do now. This is who I am. This is how I show up. I obsessively learn the skills and use my learning promise, and show up over time, compounding over time, over time, over time, and just show up and create and give, and people love it. And okay, so that's a part that's important to the story. And also, then I had another boy, and so I have 3 sons. And the beginning part of, I mean, not only are we, you know, postpartum, and having 3 kids under 5 is, like, a lot. What I was also moving through was, like, this healing with my mother and my brother, and just a lot of family stuff coming to the surface, because I decided I wasn't doing these patterns. I was gonna have uncomfortable conversations with my mom. I was going to, you know and I also was moving through the victim part of the process. Why did she act like that? Why does my dad have to be this way? Like, I really played in that programming, and I think that's part of the journey always, because remember, you're just like learning how to be human, especially if you've had like an incredibly like chaotic, you front loaded your life with a lot of trauma. I'm not sharing all of the traumas that I've been through, because there's been a lot, but the ones that are definitely big and landmark in the story are important. But when you front load your life with trauma like that, and chaos and instability, and there is this incredible, if you choose, healing phase. And I believe that victim mentality and the victim programming comes through, you go through that naturally as a process, because you're sort of dysregulated and unsettled, and you're working through how your body's like recalibrating to a whole different way of life. And then you're having kids, and those first 10, 15 years, first 10 years for sure were very intense. And at the same time, I was growing 3 businesses, 2 to 3 businesses that were really successful. And I was trying to prove to myself and to the outside world, especially living in a small town, that I wasn't this person anymore, that I had grown up. And I was trying to like outrun this bad reputation that I had in my mind, and how people saw me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And even though, like, when I talk about my early 20s, or I hear people talk about their early 20s, like, a lot of it isn't actually that different as far as like behavior patterns, things like that. So, I went into like a lot of proving, a lot of victim mentality and pushing and pushing and pushing to try and be the busiest bee on the block. Remember, like in those, that was like the early 2010s, etc., where like you wore your busy badge, especially as a mom, and like, being on your phone was like cool and da 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 da, right? I have an online business and whatever. That was part of my journey as well, where I really had to be with who I was becoming. And then my middle son had a lot of asthma, and so it was just a very, very intense. It was like this alchemical squeeze of who are you going to be? Who are you going to be? Are you going to continue to point the fingers out at the people that hurt you, the people that didn't show up for you the way you think they should have shown up? And I can see people that have had any type of childhood for the most part, but ones like mine where it's so easy to point the fingers outward. It's so easy to be like, well, if I was raised this way, or if this didn't, and also how easy is it actually? It becomes really difficult. It becomes a drain. It becomes this way that you are not taking accountability for your own adult self and your own adult actions and your own adult patterns, how you're parenting. Like it really showed up in my parenting and how I wanted to love these precious boys so well, and I was struggling within that victim mentality, things like that. So that was a part of the journey that really, and then I did Kundalini teacher training in 2015, and that really shifted a lot of energy for me. That yoga is incredible. And I really started to have more space within my system to be with what I had experienced in the first part of my life. Now being a parent to three young boys and in this marriage and these businesses. And in 2015, I also won an award in the community for Young Entrepreneur of the Year, where I was being awarded, I guess I was being awarded for all of the efforting I was doing, like trying to prove myself. Because I had this incredible rental business and this jewelry business, and I was creating events in our local community, things like that. And um, but I was burnt out. I was burnt out and I needed a change. And yeah, I think we all come to those moments in our lives where we realize how much we were doing for the outside world and to create a perception of ourselves. But it's actually not who we are, who we genuinely want to be. And like, I probably didn't really know at that time who I really was. I knew that I wanted to help people. I knew that I wanted to help women, period. And the Kundalini really helped me with that. And shortly after in 2017, early 2018 is when I was had a big busy jewelry business. I was in stores, I was in magazines, I was online, I was doing pop-up shops, and then all of a sudden quote unquote, air quotes, all of a sudden I had this like deep download to it came in like beyond the beads. So beyond the beads was like my message to myself that I'm here to serve in a bigger way. And you know, I started speaking on podcasts and stages and just sharing more of my story um out in the public, out in socials, all of that. And um then I stepped into coaching and I stepped into creating spaces for women to come and just be and to feel seen and to feel celebrated, and dance was a huge part of that. And I created my brand then was called Wild Her. that came through in the most beautiful way. And Wild Her just became this sort of local movement. And I had online programs and group coaching, one-on-one clients, all of that. And it was really powerful. I I got to create events and spaces for women who had never like even stepped foot in a circle or let alone knew that this type of relationship with other women was available. Just being seen and loved and adored and celebrated with no cattiness, with no gossip. And so that really started to solidify this mission within myself that I actually knew from a very young age that I was here to do something big, quote unquote. A lot of us have that, and that is actually something I would see throughout my journey, even in the darkest times when I was deep in the patterns and the drugs and addiction and all of that. I could still see this light. It would look like me on stages, and this could be considered a stage as well, like just sharing the experience. And it's so interesting, right? Like you have these glimpses of nudges that come through during your journey and you're like, "Oh yeah, oh yeah." It's called the threads of harmony, like the threads have always been there. They will always be there, but you've got to like look back at your journey and see them and weave them together. So 2018, 2019, I was creating events and all of this. And then 2020 happened. I left my marriage for a short time there, 8 weeks, but then, like at the start of 2020, and then COVID happened, and I went back home and we were mending. And I hosted a couple really beautiful retreats during the time when we weren't supposed to be gathering, and it was so impactful. And what also happened at that time was some big sisterhood wounds came up with women that I had brought into my world to be a part of facilitating um, within my environments, within my events and retreats and things like that. And um, I retreated from sharing. I went back to the art. I went back to making with my hands, which it's not wrong. It's beautiful because it's led me to where I am today and how clear I am on the clothing brand and who I'm making for all of that. But I know that I needed to go home and heal and move through this process of what is now my completed marriage 19 years later with the art again. There was big healing and big alchemy that I needed to do, and teaching myself how to sew, teaching myself how to make clothes, teaching myself how to design garments and, really create a cohesive look and dial in on who I'm creating for. Like so much has happened creatively in the last 5 years, and deciding to to do a hero dose of psilocybin in November of 2024. And there's so much to the story that I'm like obviously not sharing in detail in this moment, but I wanted to give you an overview of how I got here. And I took the dose in 2024. It changed everything in my physiology and my life. My intention during that ceremony was to see. And I have had this incredible, like, veil lifted. It was lifted during the ceremony. I saw this fabric of reality. I then after that, and I took integration through 2025, like the most serious thing I've ever done. And um, I took 6 months off social media and I dove into classical metaphysics, the OG metaphysical teachers, the OG teachers of manifestation. Like I'm talking books that were written before the 1950s, before any internet dilution happened, and it literally changed my whole life. The synchronicities that happened in 2025 and still to this day, like where we're at January 22nd, 2026, has been incredible. Um, that mushroom journey, it was guided by a beautiful facilitator in a therapeutic setting, and I cannot recommend enough if you have experienced a life similar to mine in any way, a lot of trauma, and you've been working through it in different ways, that shifted me like I can't even really put into words. And, you can reach out and we can talk about it. I am going to do a full episode on that journey because it's something that I've been asked about a lot. But the synchronicities of that it was time for my marriage to be complete kept coming and coming. And if I'm really, really, really honest, and that's what I'm aiming to be here all the time, is I've known for a long time. I believe that we've both known. I can't speak for him, but I know that I knew for a long time that it was complete, but as we do, we kind of like stay in this experience for a lot of reasons outside of ourselves and inside of ourselves. And eventually life just led me to these incredible sequence of events that were so synchronistic. I like literally could not ignore it. And thankfully, I have created a baseline within myself over the years where I live in a high frequency. I live in deep fucking gratitude all the time. And so the way life showed me wasn't everything crashing down in a really bad way or health or anything like that. I need another drink. It was actually through these beautiful, incredible synchronicities that were magical, and it felt like I was living and still am living in this whole a whole different timeline showed up, and it was gentle and fun and real and true the way that it was like, okay, when I knew it was time for me to have the conversation with Alec, it was the most clear I'd ever been. Like when I first had Ethan, it was like, this is it. I know that I'm going to have to go through this challenging phase and challenging conversations and show up to everything that I've wanted, all of that. And I'll share more in another episode because we're almost at an hour here. But in the end of October, I left and came here. And what has transpired over these last few months has been just incredibly beautiful and synchronistic and showed me without a doubt who I'm here to serve is these beautiful, incredible midlife women that are they know they have an assignment in this life and they've been doing the work to really become into themselves and take full radical responsibility for their story, their actions, their archetypes, the identities that they've played out, the shame, the guilt, moving through all of that to be the one that God assigned you to be. That's what this is all about. I've moved through all of that to show up here and say, I am being the one, and I have been the whole time. Like, none of it is a mistake in any of our paths. None of it is a mistake. I don't believe in mistakes. I don't believe in quote unquote failures. We are always learning and we are always receiving what we need to receive to move forward in accordance to our orientation point, in accordance to the filters and the perceptions that we're using that our creative energy animates. And if you have any more questions about that, please let me know. If you have any feedback about this episode, any questions, please let me know. So that's where I'm at today. And, it's been a wild ride. Of course, I've left out just like a lot of stories and details and things like that that I'm sure will come up through the episodes. But I wanted to give you a real foundation of like what I've lived through, who I've created myself to be over and over and over again. Like through my creative journey, I have really understood and worked with the mechanics of reality being an artist and deciding, like, no, I'm going to teach myself to electroform now. This whole huge setup that would take this whole table and chemicals and electricity and copper, and like this is how I create now, and like over and over and over again, and deciding to heal myself from my gallbladder, deciding, I've just decided who I was going to be over and over and over again with an obsessive intensity. And now I'm in school to get my doctorate in metaphysics, someone that, like, I got kicked out of class in school all the time. I barely went to college. I forgot to even say it in this story. Like, there was an archetype and an identity of the bad student, like the horrible student. I didn't believe I was smart for a very long time. Like, I'm talking probably 5 years ago. I'm like, okay, I'm smart. Like, studious, no, smart. I read a lot of books, but you have to understand your own version of smart. You have to be okay with your own version of smart and allow the truest version of you to express yourself through how you are smart, how you learn, what you are passionate about, and putting that out into the world. And at midlife, we are so set up, sisters, to experience the most transformational part of our journey here in this earth school, in this curriculum, because we've lived a lot of life already. We've lived half an incredible human life for the most part. So we've gathered a lot of experience, a lot of evidence, a lot of stories, and now we are biologically, physiologically, our brain, like we're set up to morph into the truest version of who we're here to be. Period. And we're here to really take a look at who's been authoring our story outside of us. For a lot of us, it's been people outside of us, it's been culture, it's been beliefs that have been ingrained in us, all of it. And that's okay. But there comes a point in your life where you look around at the life that you are living and you're like, is this even my creation? What am I doing here? Who am I being? And is this really aligned for me? Powerful, confronting, sobering questions to ask. And that's what this podcast is going to be all about, and pointing us to the metaphysics of midlife and just so many juicy ways that we can enter into this conversation about shifting who we're being at midlife and to live out the rest of our incredible human journeys in like the most alive and expressed way that we can. So let me know if you have any questions, comments. Please share this out if it resonated with you. And I'm so excited to continue to show up and share in this way. Yeah, thank you so much for listening. And I'll see you on the next episode. I'm going to drop weekly episodes. Okay, love you. Bye.